Okay. All right. So good morning. I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for being here. So we're going to discuss the FY23 operating statistics report. And so for some of you, might be familiar. You may have done this in the past. And for Katie, I know has not seen this, so this will be valuable for her. So we're just going to kind of go through the report. So we'll talk about reporting deadlines, any changes to the report, do a quick overview of the report. We'll pull up a copy of the FY23 report and kind of quickly run through a live demo of it. And then we'll preview the FY24 report. And once the webinars are done, we'll make all this information available, the slides, the audio recording, the FY23 and FY24 report. We'll send those to Blair at IMD, and he'll post them to, excuse me, the OpStats webpage. Jonah, I don't know if you've got that link handy, if you could put that in the chat for everybody.
Sure, I can go find it.
Thank you. So IMD did set up an OpStats webpage where you can access the forms that you fill out and submit, and you can also access past reports. So we create PDF reports of the data that you send us. It kind of summarizes the information you send us in the OpStats report, and we create PDFs of those. So if you ever want to go back and look at what was done in the past, you can go to this webpage and download those files for your own edification. If you have questions at any time, don't hesitate to ask either through the chat or turn your mic off and feel free to ask in the webinar. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started unless there's any questions at the beginning here. Okay, and the link is in the chat. Thanks, John. Okay, so deadlines. So there are 4 deadlines. So the report is submitted quarterly. The first 3 quarters, you only submit service data, so your trips, miles, and hours, and your peak vehicle usage information, which I'll show you shortly. And those are submitted or due 1 month after the end of the quarter. So Q1 will be due October 31st, Q2 January 31st, Q3 April 30th, and then Q4 would give you a little extra time because there is financial information that's included with that submission. And so Q4 is due August 31st. And I know you guys on the urban systems might be going through financial audits and things aren't closed out. And we totally understand that. But if you could at least get us a draft copy of where things are at as of August 31st or whenever you submit that, that would be great. And then when you finalize that information for NTD, because I know you're probably going through some back and forth with them as well, like we do, just send us an updated OpStats, and then we can update our database with the final information. So we do import this information into a database that we house, so we can create those statewide reports and then provide that information to Ryan at IMD. So changes to FY23 report. So the only change that we've made, your report has been fairly static over the years, but we did add a new microtransit mode for those that may not be familiar. And Katie is, I think, doing microtransit. Are you doing microtransit, Katie? Is that right? Or are you doing fixed route?
Fixed route.
Fixed route. Okay. But microtransit is definitely the buzzword of the last couple of years and becoming more popular. And NTD, I think, has added that. We'll add that in the FY23 report. I talked to them last year. They didn't say they were going to do it at that time, but I think they have added it as an optional mode. But we've added that to this report so we can start tracking this kind of at the beginning of microtransit implementation and start to develop a picture of the impact on other modes, especially on the demand response side, where it might take away some of those trips from traditional demand response. But the only change that we've had made to the FY23 report is adding that new mode. The FY23 report is green in color. So anywhere you see green cells, those are editable cells. So if you're trying to enter data into a non-green cell or non-colored cell and it gives you an error message that says you need a password, it's either not meant to be entered or you haven't unlock those cells, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But on the overview tab, there is just kind of some basic system information where you choose your grantee name in the first dropdown, and then provide some contact information. And it's probably better if the contact information is who's filling this out in case we have questions. We don't really do any validation with the urban OpStats, but if something does come up, we have questions, we'd want to know who was filling this out and who to reach out to for that, and not necessarily the director if they weren't the ones filling that out. The operating modes. So with microtransit, you're now up to 6 modes. So you operate either a fixed route, dial ride. So if you have fixed route, you also have the dial ride service for ADA purposes, light rail and streetcar. Those are only Charlotte, but they're in here. There's also vanpool and then microtransit. So the spreadsheet that you fill out is a macro enabled spreadsheet. And I'll talk about enabled editing shortly. But when you check the boxes in the operating mode section, it unlocks the corresponding service and financial cells in your weekday tabs, your weekday, Saturday, Sunday tabs for your service data, and the finance tab for your financial data. So you can see here's a couple screenshots. One shows the fixed route and dial ride boxes are checked in the operating mode section, and the corresponding cells in the bottom screenshot on the weekday tab are opened up. So the fixed route and dial ride cells by month are opened up and colored in green, and those become editable, whereas the light rail section is still in white, and you can't edit any information into those cells. So it's important that you enable the editing. There's that link in this file, and it's also important that you save it as an XLSM file so that the macros work correctly. This is just kind of a zoomed in shot of that page that shows the weekday tab with all of the corresponding cells that are unlocked that correspond to the modes checked on the overview tab. On the financial side, on the finance tab, you can see here the finance tabs. The financial data is by column, by mode, and the fixed route and dial ride modes have been unlocked. For you guys on the urban side, we don't really ask for much detail in terms of the financial data because we don't report any of your data to NTD. You guys do that all yourself. So we're just kind of looking for some very general financial information. Essentially, we're just looking for your expenses and revenues, right? So whether it's operating revenues or operating assistance, and then we can combine those to kind of get a large statewide picture of the total expenses and revenues by transit for everybody. Okay, so before I go into the demo, does anybody have any questions at this point?
This is Katie. I have a couple that you might want to address later, but I guess so. We offer complimentary paratransit service along with our route. Is that something that we would enter into what you have as the dial a ride?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly what dial ride is intended to do. Yep. Okay. Any others, or are you good for now? Anybody else? Okay. Can you guys see my screen with this Excel spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this here is the FY23 Urban OpStats report. And when you open this up, it didn't work here, but when you open this up the first time, there's going to be a yellow status bar that runs across the top, and there'll be a button there in that status bar that says Enable Editing. And you want to make sure you press that button to enable the editing. That's what's gonna enable the macros that are inherent in this file. If you don't do that, then the worksheet will not, or the workbook won't function correctly. And I'll kind of highlight here in a moment how those macros work. But there is an instructions tab here. Just kind of gives you an overview of the workbook itself. There are some deadlines you can see here if you need to refresh your memory there. And then there's some contact information here. We need to add Jonah, but you can contact me if you have questions when filling this out. And then on the overview tab, this is where you start to fill in the information. This is your system information section. You've got the drop down, and you'll see your list of transit systems here. So we'll need to actually add in Apex. You're not in here yet. So we'll need to get a system ID set up for you in our system, and then we'll add you to this drop down. And then you'll see, you want to go by town of Apex, Katie, or is there another name you'd prefer?
Yeah, town of Apex, I think.
Or, I mean,
I can, I might want to double check what we have as our NTD name, just so that they're
well, okay.
consistent.
Are you gonna follow the naming convention of like Go Raleigh and Go Wake Access? Or are you gonna? I mean, it's not necessarily. I mean, I guess it would match what you're reporting NTD. So if you want to just email me afterwards, and then we can set you up in here. It's not that big a deal, but we can set you up with whatever name you're going to kind of go by.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. All right, so you'll choose that, and then you'll enter your contact information in this section here. And then down in the next section is the operating modes. And this is where you check which modes you operate. So right now, if I go in here, if I try to enter information into these cells, it's going to give you this error message. It's going to let you know it's protected and you need a password. And you don't need a password. What you need to do is come back to the overview tab and check the box that you want to enter data for, which will unlock the corresponding service data cells. And then you can start to enter the information into the cells that were unlocked, right? And so I'm trying to zoom this in a little bit. It's a little hard to tell. So for each of your modes, we ask for your AM, PM, peak period vehicles, your midday vehicles, your unlinked passenger trips in this row, and then your vehicle revenue miles and your vehicle revenue hours. And so you'll do those for each mode that you operate. And obviously, if you have multiple modes, you can unlock those, and it will unlock the corresponding cells on all the tabs that you have to enter data into. Now, if you inadvertently check a box and you enter data into those cells, so say, for example, you entered Vanpool and you filled this out and you meant to do microtransit, be careful if you uncheck this. It's going to give you this message here that if you uncheck it, it's going to erase the data you entered. So if you entered all that information in the wrong mode, what you'll want to do is check the correct mode and then come over here and copy and paste this data over before getting rid of that mode, because once it deletes that data, it's gone. It's not coming back. And if you don't do that, you're going to have to re-enter this stuff manually, or you can copy and paste depending on your software. But just be aware that if you do uncheck a mode, that it will clear out the data that you put in there. So it gives you that little warning just to make sure that you meant to do that. And then we've got an operating hours. So this just tells us for each of the days of the week, weekday, Saturday, or Sunday, what your operating hours are, when you begin and end. And if you have a management or contractor, who that is. So that's kind of your basic overview tab. We talked about the weekday tab. There are some kind of data checks here. So by each of these weekday, Saturday, and Sunday tabs, what I normally do is I come over to the quarter sections and just kind of look at those and see if those seem pretty consistent from quarter to quarter. Obviously, you're going to have some seasonal variation and things like that. But if you get a big spike or a big valley, that may indicate that there was a data entry error in one of the months that you entered here. So that's one quick way to check and make sure that everything looks correct. You can do that for Saturday and Sunday and the weekly totas. Yeah, so Rodney, I don't know, I guess you didn't hear me, but you guys don't fill out the urban reports. You only fill out the rural, the CT reports. That's this afternoon if you didn't make that one. The weekly totals tab, it just sums up everything from weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. And again, a quick data check would be to look at the quarter 1, 2, and 3 columns and the year-to-date totals, and just make sure you might want to compare that to last year's report and see if there's if things are consistent. Obviously, with COVID kind of maybe slowing down, we might start to see services come back to pre-COVID levels. So we would expect that that's kind of happening. We also have a dashboard tab. And this just gives you a visual representation of the data that you've entered into the service tabs. So sometimes looking at all those cells can just be a little confusing, just seeing all those numbers. But this will be, each of these graphs will have line charts that displays information from the different tabs. So for example, this top one is the chips by month for the weekly totals. So it's going to take your weekly totals and it's going to look at the chips by month for each mode that you're filling data out for. And it'll just give you a line. So another quick way to see if there's any spikes or valleys and if anything needs to be corrected. So this is a good data check, visual data check. On the finance side, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't a lot of information that you need to enter here. We're just looking for your total system expenses. We get a little bit of detail in your revenues. We just break it down into passenger fares, special transit fares, other transportation revenues, and non-trade transportation revenues. And you'll do that by mode. And this will mimic what you have to do for NTD as well. So if you're providing fixed route and dial ride service, you're going to have to report that information to the National Transit Database. So you should be able to get that information from there or vice versa. And then on the operating assistance, we're just looking for totals from federal assistance, state, local government, or other. So again, just kind of very general levels of financial information we're asking for. On the reconciliation tab, you'll see up at the top, just provide the summary of what you entered on the finance tab, and then just a couple sections related to your surplus and your deficit, if you have one. And then the signature page, the signature lines, you can print this as a PDF and then sign those blue cells at the bottom and date them. If you need to print one for each, one for the authorized official and one for the financial manager, that's fine. If you can do them on one as well, that's fine. If you're going through this, you'll notice that there are these blue words in blue. These aren't hyperlinked like the real report, but we do have a definitions tab. So if you have a question about something that you're seeing, want to make sure that you're getting the right information, you can come to the definitions tab and just kind of search for whichever line you're curious about and then read the description of that item. Okay, so that is the urban report. Any questions, about this report? Okay. And then the last thing I want to introduce is just the FY24 report. And it's the same as the FY23, except for it's going to be in blue. And it just helps us track. If we do make changes from year to year, it just makes it a little easier to track those changes. So that's just kind of something we've done every year, is change the color scheme of the OpStats report. Right now, we're not envisioning anything else that's going to be added to your report. But if we do, we'll send out an email or send you out the updated report. So the only difference is the color blue. If you have questions at any time, you've got my email. You should have my email. It's on the instructions tab. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have or any issues you have. And I'm happy to hang out for a bit if you want to ask questions now as well. But if you don't, you are free to go, and I appreciate you showing up, and I hope you have a great day and a good weekend.